Well, thank you so much, Joanne and Chris. Really appreciate everybody's pitching in. We did collect a number of questions during the registration process, and so Jackie's going to go ahead and give those to us. I also did want to alert you, if you have the webinar open, that Cora has been posting links to a number of the resources that have been mentioned, both by Chris in South Carolina and Joanne from Austin. There are a lot of really amazing resources. Also posted is the GTL website, where there are a number of resources from around the country that can be accessed for absolutely free, which I know is everybody's favorite price. So I'm going to go ahead and toss this over to Jackie, who's going to pose some of those questions. If you have additional questions and you'd like to see if we can fit those in, please feel free to type them into the questions and discussion box on the bottom part of your screen. Jackie?
Yes, thank you, Doug, and thanks again to Chris and Joanne. We really appreciate you taking time from your schedule to participate in our webinar today, and of course we are appreciative of all of our participants as well, so please do put your questions in. The first one I'm going to ask Doug is from our registration process. How have you reconciled what the ESSA waiver required with what many assessment and measurement gurus have stated are best practices? For example, from James Popham and Rick Stiggins.
So that's a great question. Luckily, I don't have to do that because I don't work for the State Department, for the Federal Department of Education. I know that in the work that we've done around the country, including with folks in Vermont and other places, that this question about how SLOs are being used and what is the measurement tool has been attacked in a lot of different ways. And by attacked, I mean solved. And so some places are really sticking to the model of looking at student growth as sort of that independent measure as part of a student growth measure system. Other places have taken a look at, for example, the Stiggins model, as well as some of the other work that's out there, and they are focusing much more on the process. And as I mentioned in my presentation, one of the models that sort of didn't make it onto that 1 to 4 sort of series that we had up on the slide is actually something that came from Stiggins, which is really thinking about not the growth target setting process, but really having teachers reflect on the amount of growth that they've gotten from students at the end of the year and measuring that against what they expected students to be able to do, and then to really reflect on what they did, what the students did, what some of the success practices were, and what some of the challenge practices were as they think about the following year. So I think that those questions about assessments and the role of assessments, how many assessments are being given, should SLOs sort of spawn new assessments, all of those questions are being tackled by different states in different ways. So I hope that answers that question. Jackie, if there are other questions, please let me know, or you can direct them, of course, to Chris or Joanne as well.
Well, let's check in with you with one more. Do you know what % of the teacher evaluation that SLOs count for in other states?
Sure. So it really varies. In some states, student growth measures as part of the state law that was enacted in their states as a response to ESSA measured anywhere between 25 and 50%. I think that ESSA required a, quote, significant, unquote, amount of teacher evaluation to be tied to student test scores. States interpreted that significant amount in a lot of different ways. Some states chose to use both a combination of like a value added or state test score, student growth percentile measure, and couple that with student learning objectives, whether it was a shared attribute. So for example, if I was a foreign language teacher in a middle school, I would write an SLO or a number of SLOs that might count for 30%, but I'd also use my school's value added or student growth percentile score to round out up to 50%. I think now that ESSA is the law of the land and states are more freed up to think differently about their teacher evaluation systems, some states are sticking with it, and I think that's great where that makes sense. I think other states are like South Carolina, are in a process of reconsidering and trying to figure it out. In a number of states, that decision is actually made, as I mentioned, as a part of state law, so it's not so easy to get state legislators to change what they do.
Okay, thanks, Doug. And this next question will be for Chris and Joanne, and we'll hear from Chris first, I guess.